Hey everybody, thank you for joining us and welcome to Eternal Spring, our 2022 end of the year virtual event. Whether you've been supporting us for years or this is the first you've heard of us, we hope this event can be a source of hope and encouragement as you get an inside look at the work that our team is doing in Guatemala in their fight to make family the answer for every child in crisis. You'll be joined by hosts Greg and Alicia Pinizzotto, who I'm sure a lot of you know or have met, and they'll be taking you through the duration of the night, kind of talking through the short documentaries and videos we're going to see, talking about the work that our team is doing, and this intense need and the urgency for us to respond to the vulnerable children and families in Huehuetenango. Once again, thank you to all of you who've been supporting us, whether you just started or it's been for a number of years. We're so grateful for your partnership. And even if you aren't supporting us, thank you so much for joining us tonight to learn about this work and to learn about this need. So I think that's all I got for now. Sit back, grab some popcorn or some leftover Christmas cookies, and enjoy Eternal Spring.
Hello everyone, welcome to Eternal Spring. Here we are, we made it, you made it. Welcome, we're glad you're here. This is Alicia Pinizzotto, she's the Executive Director of Story International, and I am her husband, Greg. And yeah, we're really excited to be here tonight. If you don't know us, we lived in Guatemala for almost 10 years. And 2 years ago, we moved back to Atlanta, Georgia, where we have 2 kids. I think we actually have some pictures of when we were living in Guatemala. I'm supposed to say that. We've got them coming up here. Yeah, there we go.
Oh, look at us.
A lot younger.
Young, wild, and free.
Yeah.
Wow.
There it is.
Wow. Look at the fair.
Mm-hmm. Lots of kids. My hair was a lot longer. But yeah, so we lived there, and that was our first little house we lived in when we got married. And
cool stance.
now we live in, thank you, we live in Atlanta now, and we love it here. We have 2 kids of our own. I work as a firefighter now, and Alicia is still at the helm of Story and saving the world on the side. And yeah, and we also are a foster family, so this work is still very near and dear to us. It's still very...
Maybe more near.
Yeah, very present to us to this day, and that's why we're here tonight. You know, we're not experts, though. When you hear Alicia talk, she sounds like an expert, and I think she's an expert, but she wouldn't call herself that. I'm absolutely not an expert, just a person who knows God's heart for the vulnerable child and just wants to be a part of helping in that space. So yeah, that's where we're coming from tonight. Alicia's going to tell us a little bit more about the night and what to expect from the next 40 minutes or so together.
Yeah, the plan. Everybody likes the plan. So we're going to spend the next 40 or so minutes together. Let's be real. It's not going to be 40 minutes. I tend to ramble.
Hopefully.
Greg's really good at cutting me off. So
Keep it at 40 minutes.
We'll try. And here's kind of our goal. We would love to take kind of this like massive, nuanced, complicated, emotional issue of children separated from family and just kind of break it down into some digestible bits. What I would not want to happen is for you to sit here with us, take in a bunch of information, walk away overwhelmed, block it out from your mind because it's too much to process, and then decide to never come to one of these events again. So again, we kind of want to boil it down. We want to touch on the pieces that we think are really important. And it's going to be a little bit of a mix of things. Like we are going to hear from some people in Guatemala that either participate in our programs or lead our programs, and there'll be some real like celebratory moments in there. And then there'll probably be some heavier moments as well, just as we talk about the nature of this space, right? Of broken families, of child welfare. Like it's just, there's no way to, dress this up and make it something it's not. But here's what I would like. I would love for you to walk away, or like maybe you're not going to physically walk away from this event, but I don't know, I just have this visual of you like walking away with something in your hands. Like I want there to be something that you like could wrap your hands around, right? It's not too big. Whether it's like a piece of information, a new perspective, I don't know, a face or a story, something that you can just kind of hold on to and come back to, whether that's like, you're processing it with somebody that you trust. Maybe you're taking that into prayer. Maybe you're just sitting with it for yourself and just saying, what does this mean? What do I do with this thing? So that's incredibly vague, but that's just honestly, that's my heart for the night.
And we're raising some money as well, right?
We are going to raise money. Yeah, we're nonprofit people, so hopefully you're not super surprised by that. It's a thing you got to do. Used to feel really awkward about it, and I don't anymore. So that's a real blessing considering it's my job. We are, by the end of the year, trying to raise $100,000, which if you have been following along with us for a while, you might recognize that's like a little bit of a bigger number than our usual asks, which is a great thing, right? A larger ask, dang it, I can't say that word. A larger ask indicates growth. Right? Our programs are growing, our vision is expanding, and so we have to put the gas in the engine to make that thing go. So $100,000, just to give you an idea of like what that means contextually for our programs. In Guatemala, $100,000 actually funds the entirety of our foster care program for all of 2023. That's pretty cool. That's all the support we provide to families. That's all of our training classes. That is all of our extremely highly trained staff. It's our foster care Christmas party, it's our graduation parties, it's everything that we do to build up a network of Guatemalan foster families in Guatemala. That would be covered if we hit that $100,000 goal. So we should really do that.
It'd be pretty cool.
Yeah.
Moving along. So we, like I said, we have been back in the States for 2 years, but this past May we had the opportunity to visit Guatemala. It was a really awesome trip. I spent the week visiting with old friends, eating lots of mangoes and papayas and street tacos, and making sure my kids didn't run to the street and get hit by motorcycles, which they didn't. But Alicia was actually doing work during that time. She was meeting with people every day, our leaders on the ground, in our Guatemalan board for a few days at the end of our trip. And the question she was asking was, what is your vision for vulnerable children in Guatemala? And so I'm going to give you the opportunity to kind of talk about what those conversations looked like and what you got out of that.
Yeah, those conversations were so fun. So for, a while in the early years of our organization, a lot of times I felt like I had to lead those conversations. Maybe that's just the Americanness in me, right? Where I was kind of the vision holder. And that has shifted radically. So like Greg said, this trip was really me going after having been a year removed from operations and the day-to-day and just saying like, what's next, guys? And the conversations were really beautiful. Toward the end of that trip, we did like a 2-day board retreat with our Guatemalan board, which is, I could go on and on about our Guatemalan board. These are like, I look up to these people so much. They are well respected in their, unique spaces. And we just sat in a room and answered hard questions. Like, what is actually, going on? We have Guatemalan government officials on our board. What is actually going on? Like, what is happening in group homes? What is happening to the kids on the street? What is happening to just the child protection system in general? And the conversation, at times was complicated and there wasn't always, a clear, this is what we should do, but we did walk away with something that I think is really significant. We actually rewrote our vision statement, which some of you might not know. So our Guatemalan breathed vision for Story is this, that there would be a world where family is the answer for every child in crisis. I actually liked the way that sounded better in Spanish, and translating it was difficult, but...
When I heard that, I was blown away by it. It was like, of course, that makes sense. That is what we are doing. And it was so just felt like that was like the vision that the Lord had placed into our hands. But I also realized that kind of that statement might not be as impactful or as, resounding for somebody who's maybe not as familiar with the space, or just anybody who hasn't had the history of doing what we've done for the past 10 years. Can you talk more about why like the word family is so important as a part of that vision statement?
Yeah. So like children in crisis, why is family the answer? Okay. So when children are separated from family, everything kind of falls apart, right? And I think a lot of times we don't, if you're not in this like space every day and seeing that, you can kind of like look at that, like a child being separated from family, or a child going into an orphanage, or a child going into foster care, whatever it is. And you feel the sadness of that. You feel the brokenness of that on some level. But sometimes I think we miss all the details. Like the fabric of our society kind of rests on this concept of family, because the reality is family provides the safety and security and stability for a child to grow and develop. When that doesn't happen, right, now we have trauma, right? Which is a word we throw around a lot in today's culture, and I think it's really important that we understand what that word is, and I'm not here. We don't have time to give a course on trauma. But specifically, something that I think as a society, as people, we have to be paying attention to is trauma in early childhood. I say this all the time, like early childhood trauma, I think is an epidemic. Like an absolute epidemic of our generation. And here's why. Because trauma is like so much more than an unfortunate event or a sad circumstance or a sad story. It is those things. But now we know there have been amazing advances in the social sciences, in brain imaging, and all of these different fields that have allowed us to really understand, like, what does trauma actually do to a human being, especially when it happens in those early years. And honestly, the results are astounding, like in a scary way. And these are like reputable, global organizations that are looking into this, like, Kaiser Permanente, like the, insurance agency, and the CDC have done extensive studies on what they call adverse childhood experiences, which are traumatic events that happen during the age range of 0 to 17. And what they have been able to extract from those studies is that the more adverse childhood experiences that a child experiences, the more trauma they experience, whether it is, being exposed to substance abuse, whether it's violence, whether it's separation from a family member, whether it's having a parent incarcerated, the more adverse childhood experiences they have, it directly increases the risk, their lifetime risk, for 7 out of 10 of the leading causes of death in the United States. I just think that's like, we gotta sit there for a moment.
That's a lot.
Like, we're talking about like things like cancer, like things that you might not necessarily like intuitively tie to trauma, right? Like, we're talking about infectious disease, risky behaviors, alcohol abuse, drug abuse, maternal health issues, mental health issues, involvement in sex trafficking, diabetes, extremely increased risk for suicide. Like, when I hear that, go ahead.
No, I mean, I was just going to say, everybody kind of experiences some form of trauma, I think, most people at least, but when we're talking about this and talking about trauma in the context of kids who are therefore separated from their family, when it happens in the context of family and when it leads to separation from family, that's when it seems like it starts to get scary.
Well, yeah, and usually separation from family, you already have a number of those adverse childhood experiences because something led to that separation. Yeah. And so what I'm saying, these situations are delicate, right? We are looking at children who, without intervention, and this isn't like a death sentence, some kids' stories are different, but more than likely are going to struggle throughout the duration of their life. They're going to be more likely to get sick, more likely to get injured, less likely to have healthy relationships, less likely to be able to form any sort of, economic stability. We have to be paying attention to this because the issue of children separated from family over the long term actually ends up touching every sphere of society. Right? And so I know there's a lot of issues we could gather and talk about tonight, right? And all of those issues deserve time and attention. But for whatever reason, for me personally, this is what has caught my attention because I see it as maybe one of the most preventable things that we can be looking at and tackling. The CDC says themselves on their website, you can go look it up, that adverse childhood experiences are preventable. And what they say, the way that we can prevent it is by making sure that children are growing up in safe, stable, nurturing homes. Like, that's the scientific, this is the prevention strategy, that's it, right? So going back to that conversation, with our Guatemalan board and our vision for making sure that family is the answer for every child in crisis, that's why, right? Because trauma is not a life sentence. But it does involve significant intervention, and that intervention, has to look like nurturing, stable, consistent relationships, and that is most likely to happen in the context of family. And so those kids have the best chance of moving forward and healing when they are in that family context. And so that's why that's our vision. That's why we think it's important. Yeah.
Yeah. Shall we go to our first video of the
Yes,
night?
let's do it.
Yeah, so the first video we're going to show you is from one of the leaders of our team. He's our director of community development. As Alicia was talking kind of about our team of Guatemalans, it's one of my favorite parts of Story today is that it's almost exclusively led and run by Guatemalans. It's just such a special thing to be able to say that a nonprofit that was started by Americans, it usually ends that way, right? But I think it's so cool that Story now is led by the vision of Guatemalans on the ground in their own context and community. And I think they have so much more to offer than a group of Americans down there. And so we have Angelo tonight sharing something that he wrote and translated about the city that we work in.
From the mountains to its rivers, from one end to the other, from its blue skies to its the roads. Here, in this corner of the world, where life happens between colorful houses, old buses, and a sea of clothes. Here, where life seems to be painful and heavy, but at the same time can be like a child's smile, a heartfelt hue afterward, or a wisdom of an elder. And where the outsider is welcomed and the bread on the table is for everyone. It's here where love grows and heaven meets earth. Yes, here in Huehue, where we believe that family matters and that everyone is made in the image of God. Where walking together, we leave the past behind and look toward a bright future for everyone. Because this is who we are, hardworking people, dreaming people, united people, with 1,001 stories to tell. Stories that deserve to be told, stories that deserve to be believed, to bring hope to others, redeeming hope that lifts up and transforms our community, hope that are to be shared with every child, every youth, and every family that need it. Hope brought to each and every corner of Huehuetenango. In this way, we'll be an example of change, of development, and of a transformation for ourselves and for the whole world. And we will be proud that from small things can come greatness.
So it's not lost on us how kind of random a city like Huehuetenango is to anyone, who's followed us or has maybe made the anywhere from 5 to 10 hour bus ride, depending on the day, up to Huehue. But for us, it's a place we've fallen in love with. It's one of my favorite places in the world, and I can't really give you a reason why besides the fact that we've lived there for so long. I think it's kind of like growing up in a small town where you have this just connection, nostalgia for a place, for the beautiful parts of it and for the ugly parts of it. And you just feel that, and we definitely feel that. But it's definitely also at the same time kind of just a random, sort of in the middle of nowhere place that, it just is. But what is so cool about Huehue to me and what Story is doing in Huehue is that it is such a small town. It's really, from what I've seen, kind of unprecedented what Story is doing in this context of such a small city in a developing country. And I think that's really special. Can you talk more about kind of why it's unique what Story is doing in Huehue?
Yeah, I love it because, so this is we talked about this, right? This is a big issue all across the globe, right? We have kids in orphanages, we have kids in foster care, we have kids, and so I love just that we have been able to kind of zoom in and just say, okay, this is a place, right? It doesn't mean much to a lot of people, but it's a place and there are people here and that matters. And then we just kind of settled in, built some roots, and our team is so dedicated to doing things well. And I think something that we didn't anticipate is sort of the ripple effects that would have, right? Our team has always been so child-focused, family-focused, presently focused, which I think is what makes the work that our team is doing so beautiful, because it's not meant to be grand, and it's not meant to be, we're not trying to scale our programs to 7 countries. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but it just hasn't been the heartbeat of our team. But I think what's been so interesting is to watch is that, that kind of catches it catches on. Like, hey, something different is happening over here. You'll hear people a lot of the times talk about like foster care in the States specifically and say things like, the system is broken, which, is kind of a vague way to describe something. I think a lot of times what they're getting at is that the system is overwhelmed. And so I think about that a lot as we're building out foster care in such a small context. I'm like, how do we make sure we don't get there? Right? But every once in a while I can lose sight of that. And even like, you're saying we went to Guatemala in May and we were having like this vision conversation and, after being back in the States for a year, like my Americanisms had come back a little bit, like just that ambitious, like, I want to see the numbers kind of thing. And we were talking, with some of our social workers and caseworkers and program directors about our child to caseworker ratio, right? Like, what's our bandwidth, right? How many kids can we have, come into foster care before we then need to hire an additional, social worker or psychologist or whatever it is. And our team was throwing around the number of 10. I think we even started lower than that. I think it might have been like 8 to 10. I'm like quietly in the background. I'm like, what about 12? What about 15? Because I'm just kind of running the numbers in my head. I'm like, well, can we do a little more? Because it does. It takes a lot of resources to like find staff, train them, onboard them. And our team pushed back pretty hard, which I loved. It is not necessarily like the norm for Guatemalan culture to be confrontational in any way. And they're like, yeah, no. They're like, that's great, Alicia, but if we do that, like, here's what we sacrifice. Like, we will not be able to provide the quality of care and service that we currently are. So, like, is that something we were willing to do? And I was like, oh, I guess definitely not. Because the reality is, like, the work our team is doing is very comprehensive in the sense that, like, we are pushing for family reunification. Sometimes our social workers and psychologists are driving 8 hours out into the middle of nowhere mountains of Guatemala to go knock on doors. I'm talking, like, literally, like, door to door, being like, is there an ant out here? And it's amazing, but that's the work. Like, that's what it takes. And so I think, yeah, what is so unique and what I think should really hopefully be an encouragement to even like other child welfare agencies is like, I know you got to raise money, and I feel the pressure of that. I'm like, we want to raise $100,000. Yeah, we have a handful of foster families. But like what that actually looks like in real time is worth it 100 times over, right? Like what we're seeing, like these families that are being reunified. I don't think we've had a kid linger in foster care for more than 6 or 7 months. I might be off by a couple months there, but it is not a long period of time, and it's not because we're like just trying to push them along. It's because our team is doing such quality work of investigating and finding the biological family and doing these family visits and providing the counseling. And I mean, literally when a child comes into our program, like if a child is placed in with one of our Guatemalan foster families, immediately there is a social worker and a psychologist assigned to the child. There is then a social worker and a psychologist from our family preservation team assigned to the biological family simultaneously. We're talking about 4 trained adults for one child that just entered care. Is it the most economically efficient way to run things? Absolutely not. Should that be our standard for how we operate? Absolutely not. And so I love that our team is doing that, and then I love that now there's some eyes on it. Not because we want attention, but because I'm like, oh, we really could change this on a larger scale. So anyway, I just want to congratulate my team Foremost. Yeah. Foremost.
Yeah.
For sticking to their commitment to excellence, and then also just as an encouragement, right? I know there's maybe people watching who are involved in child welfare. Like, if something's not working, we don't have to keep doing it that way, right? I know it's not always that simple, especially when you're looking at like the magnitude of the system in the States, but let's make changes. Let's make small changes that actually move us toward that standard of excellence for children.
Well, and if you followed the history of Story at all, you've seen, we've worked in institutions for a few years, and moving out of that was very overwhelming because it felt like, how are we going to tackle this problem? But to where we are now, there were hard years in that, and the impact now I think is much greater, even though there aren't the numbers that you would see otherwise.
Yeah, change is scary, but then you look at the real life impact and you're like, yeah, it's worth it. It's worth all the risk. So we are going to move into our next video. This is a fun video for me. This is just a video of some of our, like, just really people I look up to in this family-based care space. Honestly, people that have, like, mentored me and guided me that are just going to share a little bit about their experience with Story. So I feel really honored that they have done this for us. Before I do that, I am going to make, like, our first official ask of the night.
And if you want to give, there will be a QR code somewhere in this part of the screen.
Yeah,
I think
thanks.
over here.
You did that.
Yeah, there's a QR code that you can, I don't even know what you're supposed to do with it.
You scan.
You scan it, yeah. You can
We don't know
scan
how
it.
to use technology yet.
But I'm going to run through some numbers. These are kind of our bigger asks, and they'll kind of get smaller through as the night goes on. But we'll kind of explain what these can cover. So a $50,000 donation tonight obviously gets us halfway to our goal, and that pays the salaries, benefits, and all related personnel costs for our entire foster care team. And so who's on that team, or how many people are on that team?
Yeah, so it's 2 social workers, 2 psychologists, and a program director. So that is 5 full-time, trauma-competent, trained employees that are able to recruit, train, and support foster families and children in care. So that's a big deal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then a $35,000 donation, that's covering all of our therapy, counseling, and related expenses across all of our programs 2023. And how many psychologists is that are doing that?
5 full-time psychologists. So yeah, I love this number. If someone has $35,000, just you should give it. This is awesome, right? Like, we, have seen in our experience that this piece, we offer a lot of great services to our families, but this piece of therapy, counseling, and it's all wrapped in, like, not necessarily with this number, but with our discipleship program and just the accountability, counseling support and spiritual support that we're providing to families is the one thing that I would say I across the board, kind of determines how successful a family is going to be in moving toward independence every time, right? Mm-hmm. If they're coming to their individual therapy, if they're coming to their family therapy sessions, we are seeing progress. Yeah,
and then $15,000 is covering all of our nutritional support provided to families in our family preservation program. That's a lot of stuff, I know, but kind of what are some of the main things that's doing?
So we have a daily after-school lunch program. So kids go to school, and then they come to our facility. It kind of functions as like a community center at this point. They do like tutoring and things like that. But anyway, that $15,000 would cover our daily after-school lunch for the entire year, a daily snack for those kids for the entire year, as well as our monthly food deliveries to each of our families. There's about 80 individuals in our family preservation program, and so those monthly food deliveries they're significant. And that's what that would cover. So let's see what some of our friends and supporters have to say to us tonight.
Hi, my name is David McCormick, and I'm really excited to share with you about what Story International is doing in Guatemala. I serve as the executive director for ACH, which is the Christian Alliance for Orphans in Latin America, and I get to see a lot of the cool work that is going around all across the region. One of the main things that we try to focus on is looking for those ministries that are working with local churches to raise up families in their own communities to take care of the most vulnerable children. And Story International in Guatemala is doing just that in a really unique area of Guatemala, and they're really pioneering this work that they're doing of raising up families to take care of children that would otherwise end up in orphanages. So we are so excited to share with you what Story International is doing. It's a ministry that we are very excited to get behind and support and encourage them because we think they're doing the most incredible work of involving the local churches to take care of those most vulnerable children in Guatemala.
Hola, soy Paola Alvarado, directora de Somos, la iniciativa de cuidado vulnerable de Iglesia Reforma en la ciudad de Guatemala. Desde Somos ha sido un gran privilegio ver el trabajo de Story International en los últimos años. Hemos visto cómo Story busca dignificar la vida de cada una de las personas de las que sirve. También hemos visto cómo desde la junta directiva, el staff se ha preparado buscando las mejores prácticas y así servir a las poblaciones vulnerables. Hemos visto cómo Story respeta y honra la cultura, los recursos locales. Y asimismo, hemos visto cómo Story busca el preservar a las familias, el preservar a los niños en familias, en lugares seguros y saludables. Por eso y muchas cosas más, queremos darles muchas gracias a Story por el trabajo que están haciendo en un lugar lejano a nuestra ciudad, en un lugar que muy pocos llegan. Muchísimas gracias a Story por lo que están haciendo con los niños, con la iglesia, con las familias. Gracias.
Hi, from Stephanie Robinson with the Faith to Action Initiative. We love Story International for a lot of different reasons, the amazing work they're doing on the ground being one of them. But our biggest reason we love supporting and standing with Story International is the way that they seek to educate their donors and their community about the realities about children in orphanages around the world. They do such an amazing job, and we love having them as partners, and we love them.
Thanks, friends. That's a fun video for you to watch. I know all of those people, like I said, respect them, and just feel honored that they continue to be so encouraging and speak so highly of the work our team is doing. So thanks, guys. Okay, so before we move into this next video, which is the video I'm most excited about for the night, I do just want to kind of jump back to what we were talking about at the beginning and make sure we, have a somewhat unified understanding of this issue that we're talking about. But like I also said at the beginning, I don't want it to be like so big that it's like scary, right? So, I mentioned some things at the beginning, about the nature of, early childhood trauma and what that can mean. And Greg, I kind of want to help you to help like us, the audience, because I think you're really good at like humanizing things. So I want you to kind of talk through like how you take in information that might be overwhelming and then kind of boil it down. So like, for example, some of the things that are like constantly flying through my head, unfortunately, is the fact that like there are 8 million children living in orphanages around the world. Like I go to bed on Christmas Eve thinking about that. There are over 400,000 kids in the U.S. foster care system. There are actually over 40,000 kids in the U.S. foster care system living in group homes, which I think most people maybe don't understand, because in the States we phased out orphanages around the 1950s, but we do still have a lot of kids and specifically teens growing up in group homes. We know that 80% of kids living in orphanages globally have at least one living parent that could potentially care for them. We know that less than a quarter of kids living in group homes or institutional care have a secure attachment. We know that kids in group home settings are 6 times more likely to experience physical violence and 4 times more likely to experience sexual violence than kids in foster care. And we know that kids living outside of a family context are, in general, have poor outcomes and are actually twice as likely to commit suicide. So that's like the top 1/10 of the list of like the statistics I could throw at you right now. So so when you hear that, like, how do you respond?
I mean, we use the word a lot, but it's overwhelming, right? It's an overwhelming set of statistics, and I couldn't regurgitate them back to you just because the numbers are so big, and I've heard them so many times. And if you're like me, the temptation is to hear all that and then just go look at sports scores or just kind of ignore it and move on. But I imagine a lot of you are involved in this type of work in some way, and so you have to confront this information at some point. You have to see it and process it and understand what it means for your own personal journey and whatever you're involved in this sphere of working with vulnerable children. And for me, I always just go back to experience. I think about the kids that I've worked with, the kids that I've been around, and the one that I've come face to face with, and just kind of realizing that one person is one of those 8 million or however many, whatever stat you're talking about. They represent a small portion of some, or if not all of those stats. And I think about my interactions with those kids, and what gives me hope is that I have somehow planted a seed in their lives. I've somehow been able to affect them, and that the people who are working directly with vulnerable children are all planting seeds that are doing something to affect this problem little by little. And I think it takes a lot of faith and of courage to really look at that one person and say, I'm going to give you everything I have, because it's worth it. And to not get overwhelmed by that big number, but to look at the one and say, if I can affect you, I'm doing something. And I think that's sort of how I come to peace with it. Not saying that I am doing anything special, because I can look at every child and every vulnerable child I've interacted with and have probably more failures than successes. But it's faith that the Lord is working through me, even coming out of, as we talk about, the foster child we had in our home this past year, feeling like such a failure more than anything, but at the same time realizing some of the things that that the positives, the fact that we were able to provide a safe space, that we were able to give hope. I think you have to look at it that way in order to move forward in this work and not be completely just destroyed by the gravity of the problem.
Yeah. I mean, definitely this is something I've struggled with. I'm a vision person. I'm a high level person. I like to understand the problem in all of its complexities, and what that can mean for me is actually removing myself from the one, right? Like Andy Stanley has this quote that says, do for the one what you wish you could do for the many or for everyone. And I that quote makes sense to me, but I can't say it's always made sense in real time because, like I said, I kind of always have constantly swirling around the magnitude of this issue. And so it takes a lot for me to ground myself. But so if you're like that, and you're just kind of hearing this and you're like, oh, we got to save the whole world. Like, I just want to encourage you, like whatever it looks like for you to find a face, find a story. I don't know, find whatever it is to be able to see the one. Because that then it frees you to take action instead of be frozen in being overwhelmed.
And if you're still watching this live stream or this video later on, however many minutes in we are, you care and you're here because you want to make an impact. And so I think it's super important to contextualize it in that way, to find the one and to focus on that one, knowing how big the problem is, but also knowing how impactful it can be just to be there for one person, to give everything you have to one person.
Yeah. And I think, specifically for us this year, and we, fostered in our home for the first time, and we are absolutely not here to process that experience live in front of you all. We are just barely starting to have those conversations ourselves. But I will say, just speaking about my experience in that, I had that moment where, the moment that, I'm not going to say much else because I'm going to start crying, that girl walked into my kitchen door. That quote, that concept became everything. I'm like, oh, of course. It matters, everything else going on in the world, but the magnitude of the problem, it matters that there's a lot of other kids just like this one standing in front of me, but it also doesn't, right? This is the life that's in front of me, and this is where I'm going to be. And so I just want to encourage you with that, that it can be overwhelming and it can also be here and now. And I think that's how we have to kind of navigate through this issue. So with that in mind, I am going to introduce our next video. This is really special for us. This is, a child that we know and love and respect, and he has bravely chosen to share a part of his story with us. So I'm going to let him do that, and we'll talk a little bit after, but here is Miguel.
Cuando huí de casa a los 5 años, fui rescatado por la policía, en la cual ellos me trasladaron a una casa hogar. Al llegar ahí, ellos me revisaron ya que iba con problemas de desnutrición y algunos golpes severos y fuertes lo que eran en todo mi cuerpo, en especial en la cabeza, que cuento como con unos 4 o 5 golpes más o menos.
¿Cómo vas a saludar? De machos. No, hombre, ándate. Saludo de machos.
3, 2, 1, acción.
Hola, mi nombre es Miguel López Pérez, tengo 21 años de edad y soy de Huehuetenango. Y esta es mi historia. Viví con mis padres hasta los 5 años. La causa de la que me fui, más que todo, yo huí de mi casa, se podría decir, fue de que sufría lo que era maltrato familiar por parte de mi papá. Él tomaba lo que era licor. Pues cuando llegué a esa casa hogar, ellos me dieron lo que fue refugio, vestimenta e incluso empecé a estudiar, ya que cuando yo vivía con mis padres no tenía nada de eso y no estudiaba. Y ahí cumplí los 18, ahí estuve prácticamente la mitad de mi vida hasta ahora. Al cumplir los 19, salí de esa casa hogar y pues como conocía a los directores de Story International, yo me aboqué a ellos y les pedí como ayuda, se podría decir.
Miguel para mí es una persona resiliente, ya que él sabe adaptarse a los cambios y a pesar de todas las dificultades que ha vivido a lo largo de su vida, pues esas dificultades las transforma en oportunidades.
Pues mi experiencia con el joven Miguel ha sido bastante emocionante, la verdad. Del momento en que lo conocí, ha sido una persona muy respetuosa, una persona muy alegre, muy dinámica.
Pues en esta casa, en esta organización Story International, llevo viviendo o me han apoyado desde hace un año. Actualmente vivo con 5 jóvenes más que también los ayuda la organización. En la organización Story International he tenido con más libertad de ser quien soy, de poder conocer más personas, de poder ir a lugares que tal vez no había ido antes. Pues la verdad, yo siento que la psicóloga que me ayuda más fue la psicóloga llamada Carla Molina. Y pues actualmente con las otras dos pues también me han ayudado bastante. La trabajadora social Belu Toledo, ella me ha apoyado bastante en lo que es los estudios. Fue una de las personas que me ayudó este año, la verdad ella entró este año para apoyarme y pues sí me ayudó bastante para poder yo salir ya y graduarme.
Él estudia en el Instituto de Educación Diversificada, INED, y está cursando la carrera de perito en gestión hotelera. Es un joven muy inteligente, sabe mucho acerca de su carrera y es algo que le apasiona.
Gracias a la organización Story International, yo me voy a graduar este año y pues aún no tengo muy definido qué es lo que quiero seguir después en la universidad, si te podría decir, pero está entre economía o administrador de empresas, sería una de esas dos. Pues eso. Y pues la psicóloga Carla, que también así se llama la que está ahorita, también me apoyó bastante este año.
Era una persona un poquito más tímida, yo he visto cómo él ha ido evolucionando, es más dinámico, es una persona que hace amistades con facilidad. He visto, como les digo, el avance que ha tenido socialmente, en cuanto a su convivencia con sus compañeros también, él siempre dedica un tiempo para ellos, entonces es algo que también me agrada mucho.
Entré al Hotel Ruina Resort de aquí de Huehuetenango, que se podría decir que es el mejor, y eso fue gracias a las dos trabajadoras que están ahorita, tanto el señor Belo como el señor Carla, ya que me aboqué a ellas al decirles si era una buena opción de estar en ese hotel o no. Ellas hicieron lo posible, fueron conmigo a dejar lo que era la papelería, las solicitudes, y siempre estuvieron conmigo ahí en todo tiempo. Se podría decir que a largo plazo, a unos años, lo que a mí me gusta o quiero es como ir a otros hoteles de aquí del país de Guatemala, o si Dios lo permite, o en otros años poder salir del país y poder ir a elaborar a otros hoteles, tanto en turismo como en gastronomía, y poder conocer más culturas. Entonces esas serían algunas de mis visiones para mí, y después ya establecerme económicamente y de repente alguna familia.
Lo veo haciendo las cosas que le gustan, lo veo con una familia, lo veo como un padre de familia responsable y también como un adulto seguro.
Actualmente estoy conociendo, se podría decir, a una chica con la cual a veces salgo a pasear con ella, pero si ya sea fuera de todo esto, hablamos sobre nuestra vida, sobre cómo ha ido nuestros días y qué hacemos y cómo nos tratan o cómo vamos o cómo nos sentimos. Y pues con ella lo que hacemos es ir a comer o a caminar a lugares. Tal vez él puso a esos policías ahí en el momento exacto cuando yo salí de casa para que ellos me encontraran y me trasladaran a un lugar mejor. Y pues se podría decir que él siempre estuvo ahí conmigo apoyándome sin importarle de que yo le reclamara o le dijera que por qué todo esto. Más sin embargo, como sabemos, él siempre es fiel, nunca nos abandona, siempre está ahí para nosotros, solo es de buscarlo y seguir ahí en sus caminos a un futuro largo, para las personas que tal vez no hayan vivido lo mismo que yo, sino que problemas similares. Lo que me gustaría es como poder ayudarlos o poder como hacer, no sé, algunas charlas de motivación para ellos y poder decirles que sin importar las cosas o todo lo que uno ha vivido, se puede, sin importar de qué pasado vengamos, podemos salir de ello y podemos llegar a triunfar y cumplir los sueños que nos propongamos. Y gracias a Dios todo esto se ha podido, pues siempre me ha ayudado.
Wow, thank you, Miguel, for your bravery, for your transparency. So cool just to see him sharing. We've known him since, I think he was in the second grade maybe. But it's just really cool to see him talk about his journey. And what stands out to me is just him talking about his relationships. Obviously with his girlfriend, super cute, but then also just that he has such awesome relationships with his social worker and with his therapist. And I know there's a lot you want to say about that, but before we do that, we're gonna present another ask. And so we're gonna present a few more numbers here. Again, the QR code is on the screen. You can get to that and that'll take you to our donate page. A few more kind of bigger numbers here. $5,000 pays for the case management expenses for our foster care program for 2023. What does that kind of look like, those expenses?
All of it. So picture a kid comes into foster care, you have to manage the case. So it is everything having to do with like dealing with a biological family or like study, different like evaluations that need to be done, psychological evaluations, court dates, case management expenses.
All right, yeah. $1,000, that is covering the cost of our foster care educational workshops for the whole year. How often are those happening and what are those
Every
doing?
month, like sometimes more. This is so exciting because this is like, it's community education, we're recruiting foster families, but it's kind of bigger than that. So our team is, going in and like initially having conversations with pastors at these churches that we are looking to partner with, and then inviting, they're inviting us to then engage with either their whole congregation or maybe their small groups or their marriage groups. And we're really just having like these conversations around like, what is the biblical call to care for the orphan and the widow? What does that mean? Let's break that down. And then obviously opening up opportunities for people to get involved, whether it's through fostering or mentoring or supporting our foster families. So I pay that. What is it? $1,000. Yeah. Pays for all of those workshops for the whole year. That's a lot of people. They get to learn a lot of things.
Yeah, and if you don't know about donating to a nonprofit, it is tax deductible. So you can
wow.
take
Thank
that.
you, Greg.
Yeah.
And then, we had another one that we were talking about, and $500. So $500 covers all of the expenses related to accrediting for new foster families. So I love this one because it's just, real concrete, real practical. So like when a new family goes through the accreditation process, there's just like a lot of stuff you got to do, right? Like medical exams, fingerprinting, just documents after documents, home study visits. And so $500 pays for all of that for 4 new families. Pretty cool.
That's awesome.
Okay, so yes, if you would like to give, you can scan the QR code. There's also a give page under this live stream. But I want to kind of go back to what Greg was saying about Miguel and what he was sharing in his story. And it's the same for me. As I hear him talk, and especially like kind of knowing, his specific history, and I love that the things that he's excited to share about are these relationships that he's building. And the reason that stands out to me is because, a lot of the times, children who have experienced, trauma at a young age, struggle to form healthy relationships in adulthood. And if we had hours here, I would love to go deep, have a deep conversation about attachment theory and attachment styles. And I would love to nerd out with you on that. So if that is of interest to you, just, shoot me an email. But, just to kind of do a basic overview here, right? Attachment, just like if that term is not familiar to you, is just the way that we relate to other human beings, right? So our attachment style forms in those early years as we're interacting with our primary caretaker, and then we can form an attachment style that is either secure or insecure. And then insecure kind of breaks down into different attachment styles: avoidant, anxious, disorganized. We're not going to go into all of that. But it's important to understand this on a basic level because children who are unable to form secure attachments in childhood are likely to have a pretty tumultuous relationship track record throughout their life, which is really hard to watch. We've seen that a lot, where they want to have healthy relationships, but they have not had the experience of safety and trust in the context of a relationship, and they just struggle through it. Because here's the reality of trauma and the nature of trauma. For the most part, trauma happens in the context of relationship, right? There's some outliers there, but for the most part, trauma happens in the context of relationships. But the flip side of that coin is that healing from trauma also happens in the context of relationships. So there's a lot of hope there, right? Because your brain, has had these experiences that tell you the world is unsafe, right? You cannot trust. And these are pretty well-formed, neural pathways in your brain, and they're stubborn, so attachment styles don't change quickly. But when you start to introduce new experiences, new relationships, new people, consistently into someone's life, the brain takes notice, right? And your attachment style can actually shift. And so, I think that concept is intuitive enough, right? Trauma happens in the context of relationship, therefore healing happens in the context of relationship, which is why we have built all of our programs around this idea that those secure attachments and secure relationships are most likely to happen in the context of family. Every once in a while, you can form a secure relationship with a peer as a child, but more than likely that's going to be less helpful than helpful. I love to hear Miguel talk about that. I love to see that he's pursuing healthy relationships, that he is, taking, the leap to say, I'm going to trust my psychologist. I'm going to go to therapy. I'm going to, engage with my social worker. I just see the healing happening in real time as he's sharing about that. So thank you, Miguel, for being brave and sharing that. With that, we're going to go into our last video of the night. You want to introduce it? Want me to introduce it?
Yeah, I can introduce it. Like we're saying, our goal is to keep kids and families as much as possible as a short-term and long-term solution. And this next video is talking about our foster care program. And it's just really cool to see how passionate the people who are working in this space within Story are. Here it is.
Cada oportunidad que un niño tenga de estar en una familia va a ser de transformación para su vida, va a ser de transformación para su futuro, para sus futuras generaciones, va a ser de transformación para nuestro departamento, para nuestro país. Yo creo que si queremos ver transformado nuestro país, tenemos que empezar a trabajar desde la niñez.
El programa de acogimiento familiar temporal exige mucho porque son familias que de verdad sientan el deseo y el llamado de Dios para abrir las puertas de su corazón y de su hogar para atender a estos niños que son vulnerables. Sabemos que el trabajo se hace para Dios. Las familias con las que trabajamos también han respondido a ese llamado y entonces sabemos que vamos por un buen camino, que lo que se está haciendo, aunque sea lento, pero sí está trayendo frutos aquí en Huehuetenango.
Siento mucha alegría de que Dios me abriera las puertas o que Dios me pusiera aquí. Creo que a todos Dios nos ha puesto aquí con un propósito y creo que Dios me eligió, ¿verdad?, para poder hacer el trabajo que estoy haciendo ahora. Está no solo las instituciones del Estado, está Story International, en esto nos involucra a los profesionales que estamos trabajando, a los donadores, a las familias, o sea, está todo un equipo que está detrás de todo esto para hacer sentir a ese niño o cada niño que importa. Mi sueño es ese, que hayan muchas más familias y que todos los niños tengan esa oportunidad de estar en una familia.
Yo sí creo en el acogimiento familiar temporal. He visto a muchos dudar a veces en el exterior que nos dicen eso no va a funcionar, eso se ha intentado muchas veces. No creo que funcione, no estamos en un país donde esto pueda salir adelante. Pero sinceramente yo sí creo en que sí se puede lograr y tengo mucha fe en Dios de que puede salir adelante y que en un futuro no muy lejano podamos estar celebrando un gran número de familias que estén trabajando con nuestras niñas que tanto lo necesitan.
I love watching that video. That team is amazing. I know you can hear it a little bit in their voices, but I do wish you could just like sit down and listen to their hearts. These are people that have been on their team for a long time. And, a couple years ago, weren't even really very familiar with the concept of foster care by no fault of their own. It just was not part of the cultural understanding where we work. And so it's really cool just to see the way they have been so brave to get behind something that is new. And they are amazing. I mean, Dilma, who you saw speak at the end, she will, walk into any room with any, juvenile judge that doesn't want to hear anything about foster care, and she'll be like, listen here. Children need families. She's no joke. I just respect all of them so much. And I did just want to, quick plug, and tonight's not really about laying out how amazing all of our programs are. They are amazing. But, we didn't really have time to get too much into our family preservation work, but I just want to highlight, so we're doing foster care over here. We believe it is the safest alternative to institutional care or orphanage care for kids that need to be separated from families. We believe in it. We are raising up local Guatemalans from the local church, and it's beautiful to watch. But we also recognize that foster care in and of itself is not a long-term solution, and so I don't want to paint that as the, it's the right thing to do. And it's not, but it doesn't provide permanency for children. And so our team is extremely passionate about family reunification, placing kids with extended family when possible, and pushing for adoption when those options are not possible. So we have an entire other team. It's actually our largest team. I think we have 9, 10, 20, 300. I'm just kidding. It's a big team. Working specifically on family reunification and preservation. So a kid comes into our foster care program, we have this whole army of people that come over here from family preservation, provide wraparound services to the biological family, and push toward reunification when that option is in the best interest of the child. But the cool part is, once that happens, we're still all in, which I think is something that I look around sometimes at, child welfare in different contexts, and I really see that as being a gap. And so I love that we're closing that gap and saying that we'll actually just stick with the family until they need us to. Again, this isn't doesn't pass the American efficiency test where it's all right, we'll provide our services for 2 years. Our team has just kind of said, hey, that's not really how humans work. So if they need us to continue to follow up for 1 year, we're going to do it. And if it's 5 years, we're going to do it. Because at the end of the day, we want them to stay together. So that's our family preservation program. Anyway.
Yeah. And we're starting to kind of move to a close here. I want to take our attention back to the title of our event, Eternal Spring. I didn't help come up with the title of the event.
You can say you don't like it. It's fine.
No, I like it. I know the people who came up with it really like agricultural metaphors. So, but as I was thinking about that title, kind of leading up to this and sort of what the weather of Guatemala means to me. So
they call Guatemala the land of eternal spring.
Sure. Yeah. Right. I was just thinking about kind of the day-to-day weather of Guatemala. It kind of made a goofy metaphor connection in my head. But anyway, if you go to Guatemala, if you've been there, the normal pattern almost every day in Guatemala. It's sunny in the morning. You get up and it's a little bit cool, but then it warms up into the 70s, and you feel like you can wear shorts and a t-shirt all day. You feel really confident about it. No clouds in the sky, but around 1 or 2 o'clock, the clouds start to come in. And it looks like it's going to rain, and then absolutely at 3 o'clock it starts to rain every time. And it's not like a Pacific Northwest, misty rain. It's like a dumping hurricane storm. And then by 5 o'clock, usually it's done. And if you have stuck around outside long enough, you start to see the clouds go away. They move away really fast, and the sun starts to set, and it's the most beautiful sunset you've ever seen. Some of the best sunsets I've ever seen have been in Huehue after a storm like that. And, it's either all beautiful and amazing or terrible downpour. And I feel like that's sort of what this work is like a lot of times, especially if you have been hands-on with it, like many of you probably have. It's hopeful and amazing and beautiful, or hopeless and terrible and defeating. And I was just thinking about that sunset at the end of the day and how that picture of hope and beauty at the end of it, the most beautiful thing in nature that we can picture, that sunset at the end of the day is really indicative. It's a piece of hope that I feel like I can carry with me.
Wow. We'll just end with that. No, I appreciate that. It is a little cheesy, and I don't care, because I see what you're saying there. Like, I mean, I feel that way even tonight, right? It's like, are we happy? Are we sad? Are we overwhelmed? Are we hopeful? Like, we got, Miguel over here doing great things, getting girlfriends, graduating. But then we like had this other piece of it where like, man, this is a lot. Like, 400,000 kids in foster care, 8 million kids living in orphanages. They're all not having a great time. Like, there's a lot that needs to be done. And so like, where are we in that? Like, is it the clear morning? Is it the dumping 3 p.m.? Are we to the sunset? And like, the answer is like, just yes to all of it. And that's kind of like been our story at Story. It's been our story personally. And, I guess that's kind of our invitation too, especially if you are not already involved and invested in the space, is like just to sign up for that, right? To sign up to get close enough to be like in the mix and okay with the mix and fighting for the sunset moments and not running when it's dumping rain. And in my experience, and just in my core, I believe like that matters. Every Christmas I create for our family like a box. It's very dramatic. I paint all over the sides, like our favorite songs and movies. It's a whole thing. But all throughout the year, I collect items from the year, concert tickets, pictures, whatever. This year happened to be filled with a lot of handwritten cards from our foster daughter. So we shed a lot of tears on Christmas Day reading those cards. But there was just one line that, our foster had written to me that just, I don't know, it was really simple, but it was in a Mother's Day card. It just said, "Thanks for taking a chance." And I don't know, I just sat with that for a while. And that's what it feels like sometimes, like signing up for this, like, yeah, we don't know always how it's going to turn out. And like, even in this experience in our home, like there's, a lot out of our control. And in our work with Story, there's a lot that's out of our control. But I think the nature of showing up, there's just significance there. And so I know our team in Guatemala is doing that every day. I know that we're going to try to continue to do that every day, even when it's really painful. And that's our invitation to you, is to do that. And I don't know what that looks like for you. Maybe it looks like getting uncomfortable in your finances, right? Maybe that's you showing up and saying, this is costing me, but I believe in it. Maybe it's something else. Maybe it's you making a personal investment, investing in a relationship. Maybe it's you saying, hey, how can I be a support to your Guatemalan foster family? I don't know, reach out to your local child welfare agency. We can help you if you are like lost in what to do. But I mean, going back to the other cheesy thing I said at the beginning, right, about walking away with something in your hands, I want you to like picture that. Put your hands out if you want, right? Like, hopefully there's something there. Hopefully there's like a little something that's been dropped in there, something to think about, something to chew on, something to pray about, something to talk about, write about. I don't know. Do whatever you do with your things that matter. But I would say just don't leave it there. Figure out what it means and then act on that. And I truly believe that if enough of us do that, we are moving the meter, right? We are making hope available in situations that seem pretty hopeless. And I'll sign up for that for the rest of my life, even if it kills me. So
the final ask for the night, just a couple kind of small numbers, probably the most basic and practical way you can support and empower those people on the ground who are investing, who are, giving everything they have for that one child, and who are providing hope in those situations. A $25 donation is providing 12 hours of therapy for one individual in our program, or 3 months. And $25 does not provide 1 hour of therapy in this country, so that's
for,
a huge
10
deal.
minutes of therapy in this country.
Maybe, yeah. And then so do some basic math there. $50 is going to provide 6 months of therapy. 100 would be a year's worth of counseling for one child in one of our programs. And like you were saying earlier, that's one of the most impactful things that is being done with the children we're working with. I think one of the most important things that they can do is get in therapy, especially in a therapy that's drawing them toward the Lord, that's giving them real hope and real tools to navigate their lives.
Yeah. So we are going to wrap up. Greg's actually going to invite us to pray. If you are comfortable in joining us in that, and you will continue to have opportunities to give, I would just, encourage you to go kind of back through some of those numbers that we mentioned, right? If it's $50,000 and you would like to fund the entirety of, our foster care team for all of 2023, let's do that. If it's $30,000 and you want to completely cover the counseling and therapy needs across all of our programs for an entire year, let's do that. If it's $500 to cover accreditation expenses for 4 new families, let's do that. If it's $25 and you want to cover 3 months of therapy for an individual, all of those things matter.
That's impressive.
Just memory?
Yeah.
Thanks.
That's good.
And there's 2 more days left in the year, so I will also encourage you, if you joined us tonight and any of this was significant or interesting to you and you would want to share it with anybody in your circles, do that. We will have a recording and we will be sending that out. So without further ado, I don't like that phrase, but we are going to end in prayer.
Well, yeah, I just want to say real quick before we pray, we've prayed a lot for the work being done within Story through the years. And I'd be lying if I said that there wasn't a lot of anxiety around God's provision in that. That piece of it, is always, it's hard to trust. And but the consistent thing I've noticed over the years, we've had several times where there's been, we need this money in 2 weeks, and we don't think we're going to get it, and we're going to have to fire half of our staff. And situations like that seem to have happened constantly in the last 10 years, but they never have had to happen. God has always provided for Story, and to me that has always spoken to the fact that Story was his idea, that it was his doing in the beginning when we weren't even involved with the idea being planted into someone's head. And every step of the way he has been a part of and he has provided for. So I'm going to pray for provision tonight with the faith that he has always provided and always will provide for not only this ministry, but for his people in need. Then we're also just going to pray for the population that we work with and vulnerable children all over the world. So I invite you to pray with me. Father God, we just thank you that you are a loving God, that you are a sovereign God, that you are a God that cares about family, that you are a God that cares about the one, that you are a God that cares about children and about restoring hope to those that have none. We thank you that you are a God of reconciliation and that you just always provide for us, Lord, that you never leave us or forsake us. God, that is so true, however much we say it, Lord, that you are always near. When we call on you, you answer us, Lord. And so we just ask tonight, God, that you would continue your provision over this ministry, that you would continue your provision for all work being done in the vulnerable children area, Lord, that you would just provide abundance, God, in those spaces, and provide abundance more than anything to those children, God, that feel lost, that feel broken, that feel like they don't have a home, that maybe do not have a home, God. We know that in this country right now, Lord, there are kids that don't have a home or a bed to sleep in tonight, that they're in hotels or in social workers' offices, Lord. We ask that you would raise up people to change that, God, to provide homes, to provide rooms for those kids. And in Guatemala, Lord, that you would just bring love and bring family and bring hope to those children, God, that are going around and around in the system, Father. We thank you, we love you, we thank you for this night and for every person who has tuned in tonight. It's in your name we pray. Amen.
Thank you. Happy New Year. Or something.
Have a good one.